Please help me welcome Allen Hughes. So, for how many folks was this their first time seeing it for faith? That's amazing. You're normal people. We're the other kind. I was talking with you before the screening. I mean, I've seen the thing. This might have just gotten me into double digits, but I know it's a factor of a lot more than that for you.
Yeah, I realized tonight that, like Apocalypse Now, I probably never watched it sober. Seriously.
Well, as intoxicated by the film, even too.
If you're not from that, one of my good friend over here started snoring, because it can't do that. I'm not clowning you, Jimmy. It can't sit. It's from a different era too, you know. But
Yeah.
I love it.
But anyway, I'm just tickled pink by the fact that you had the idea to share this film with us. Like I said at the top of the show, we're so thrilled. I can grab it, Robert. Thank you. With everything you're already doing with this year and everything we already had in place for Welles.
It's the third time I've dropped it.
Holy moly. You got a good case then on that. Because this is one of my favorite films, at least certainly one of my favorite Orson Welles movies. And it was a surprise when I heard that this was the one that you wanted to show. I don't know what, I was curious, kind of on edge once we sent that invitation to you to guest program something. So even, we'll dive deep into the weirdness and the magic and the grammar of it all, but just in the broadest strokes, what fueled that decision for you to show this?
I was making a film for HBO that came out last year called The Defiant Ones, the 4-part series on Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine and a lot of artists, Bruce Springsteen, Stevie Nicks. I mean, it spans like 45 years of music. And you know, it occurred to me that most people, when they watch documentaries, they feel like it's eating their vegetables. You know, it's not a fun experience for them. You know, so I had to figure out a way to make it engaging and pull people in. And I don't know when I stumbled upon this years ago on a classic movie. I saw it, and it always cast a spell on me. It always just, it's almost like I was drinking red wine and smoking weed every time I watched it. Which is probably what I was doing anyway. But you know, something about Orson Welles. There's a technique we can get to, but there's also that that whole thing about it's not what, it's not the what, it's the how, and that's what I love about this film is that I think for the first 30 minutes, and correct me if you guys. You're like, what the hell is going on? It's just, he's just dropping, he's doing this and he's dropping it, and he's picking this up and he's dropping it, and you're like, I don't know, you know. If you're from that era, you're familiar with some of the things, the artist, Howard Hughes, whatever, but it's so staccato. And what it taught me about, I don't even know if this is a documentary.
Yeah, exactly. We were saying that just before, like,
Yeah.
what do you think? A lot of people call it an essay film. Do you like that? Does that do anything more for you?
I think it's like a hybrid.
Sure.
And if any of you see the Defiant Ones, you'll see what I lifted from here, was inspired from as well. A lot of people talk about the way I approached the interview style was, it's like a conversation. It's like you're actually in the room. It wasn't interviews, it felt like a scene. And that's what he was doing there. He was manipulating the reactions and pulling you in that way, you know. Another rule I had in the editing room, I said, because people encouraged me to use animation and digital and this, that. I said, you know what? If we couldn't have cut this 50 years ago on a flatbed, we're not doing it. So all the innovation we did in Defiant Ones was innovation that could have been done 50 years ago.
So you were building your toolbox or your toy box first, and then kind of giving yourself some structure to work with them?
Yeah, you got to have rules when you're doing anything. When you're writing, some people say you shouldn't, but you need to have certain parameters and come up with a dogma, whatever, you know.
Yeah.
But this broke all the rules.
Right.
You know.
And made some of its own too. That like we still see like, on. I mean, to take the leap. We're already in a bizarre year with Orson Welles having a new movie out in 2018. So it feels less like a leap than it might have a few to look at how much this informs internet videos in the simply stated way. Just these, you know, talking head. Again, I find essay to be a useful enough term for a lot of those. But I mean, who could have predicted that? I mean, certainly not he as he was making it even.
No, I tell you, you know, it occurred to me. I don't think I've ever watched it. I don't know. I've never watched an audience one.
Yeah.
You know. But how much he influences, how much anyone influences sometimes, you know, people think studying is like you're taking notes, and I just let it pour over. Just now I realized how much I gathered from this piece and how impactful it was. If you remember that scene where you're sitting in a restaurant with all the food, and there was that blonde next to him who was just smiling, and everyone's just enchanted by him. If you look at that, you remember that ad campaign, The Most Interesting Man in the World?
Sure.
They directly lifted that.
Sure.
I mean, the magic of it is everyone's in awe of him.
Yeah.
You know, but I think the greatest thing about Orson Welles is he can talk about opening a can of beans and you're just like...
Or a fine California champagne.
I was just so inspired by the film. I remember I was the subject of my documentary. Dr. Dre had me on a yacht in the Mediterranean, and I'm trying to show him this film. And he's like, "Why did you keep playing this boring fucking film? No one thinks this hot. Put something else on it." He didn't get what I was gleaning from it, you know. And it's a little, you know, as advanced as it is technically, as much as it moves, it still has that sedative effect of a film from a bygone.
That's interesting. Well, and arm in arm with the hypnotic effect that you were talking about earlier, this thing where you kind of dial up some parts and dial down other parts of your brain and just have it sort of infuse you. So we can get to some of the structural or cinematographic stuff in a bit, but thinking too, you're talking about building rules for yourself in both your own filmmaking and whatever we can try to infer from what we see in F for Fake. Apart from structurally and filmmaking wise, that idea of truth versus, or truths versus lies or fakes, but also what I think is a more meaningful conversation, and one that we had a couple of years ago here at the festival with a vastly different filmmaker, but someone who's similarly iconic and has some, God knows, very hard-edged opinions. When Werner Herzog was here, having the conversation about that concept of the ecstatic truth, something that's not mired down by simple fact, you know, digging out meaning more importantly than, you know, some black and white notion of factuality. So do you allow yourself, or let's take the example of Defiant Ones then. Did you allow yourself some truthiness in that way, or some ecstasy of truth, or did you try to stay hard on it?
Well, let's not let the truth get in the way of a good story. You know? I mean, that does come up, and I don't believe in lying, but there's no such thing as, except for, you know, I don't know, you slap the shit out of me and I fall down, everyone saw it. That happened, you know. But the way it's told from, you know, this room forward is going to be in many different ways, you know. Or the interpretation, that's my whole point though, is that the storyteller, you know, again, if you slap the shit out of me right now, I fall down.
You got eyeballs on it. Yeah.
Right? But everyone in this room will go tell it. There's probably only 5 people, maybe if we're lucky, that will have people going, you know, on pins and needles. And that's, people always ask me like, how do you tell a great story? Or where do you find great story? Or whatever, what is a great story? I always say find great characters and the stories follow. And it makes it simple, you know, whether you're writing about someone, whether you're casting, whether he was wise enough to cast himself in the film, and his real life mistress, that's her.
Yeah.
And you can see how captivated he was with her.
And
That wasn't subtle.
And she, by the way, she's featured very prominently and with even more translucent drapery in The Other Side of the Wind that we're showing this weekend. But at this point, if I remember correctly, I think his divorce wasn't even final yet. Like, I mean, and this was still the just not even pretending. And that's something else that's entirely.
You can feel, I mean, it's bordering on porn. I'm talking about the filmmaker. You know, you're like, he's completely obsessed with this woman for all the right reasons. But, and you feel his narrative coming back around, you know, to his whim. You know, so back to your question about truth. I mean, first was a magician, and that's how he ended the film, as a magician. And it's fitting that his last film, what he really put his hands on, finished, was about magic or illusions or, you know, fakeries, he would say. But it's all bullshit. You know, I mean, it's who tells the best lie.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And I don't mean that in a literal way. I'm just saying that whoever is the most captivating wins.
It was in, I think, one of the Wells Bogdanovich, discussions I was reading through leading up to this weekend to get in, because I'm enjoying this Wells headspace this weekend as much as anyone. The concept that a magician is an actor playing the role of a magician.
Wow, that's great.
Which is just kind of like cuts through a lot of the crap of it too. Pretending that these are separate games when it's really all illusion and creation from nothing, especially in the editing room.
Oh my God. And what was great about this is he's in the editing room, touching film. And we don't touch film anymore. I was fortunate enough, my first film was the last one that was done on the flatbed, you know. But I think cinema is modern day magic. You know, it really is. It's magical what it can do, the effect it has on the audience. It's magical. And in my film, The Defiant Ones, there was a dark part of Dr. Dre's past where he had assaulted this journalist, this female journalist who he knew for many years, you know. And it always dogged him because he never really dealt with it. And we dealt with it, I mean, head on in the film. And I went, and thankfully she was able to be a part of it and told the story, told the narrative with part of, I mean, we didn't lie about anything, don't get me wrong, but I learned about the power of cinema and movement and music and sound and the effect, because he was a man that did this 25 years ago, 27 years ago, I'm sorry, and it was just on him, and it's no longer on him. I mean, he apologized. I mean, he went through all the steps on camera, but it's interesting now that how the culture, how it affected the journalists, how it affected critics. You go, wow. So if you handle it right, if you do the right things, people will process it in an interesting and profound way. I don't know if you can do an interview that can, do that. I don't know. I just think that what I'm trying to say right now is a little scattershot. Is I felt a little when you're playing music, when you have a score, I automatically go, all right, now you're in the land of this is mythology now.
Yeah.
I don't care how hardcore the documentary is, how rigid the journalism is. Once you make a cut and there's music, it's mythology.
You're shaping, it's a performance. Yeah, you can. I don't think that's too hard of a line to draw. It's a healthy one.
Well, there's this notion that when you're watching a documentary, it's journalism, it's fact, and that's what he tore apart right here.
Exactly. Yeah, not just a decade-ish or so after, the salvation of what's still called cinema verite, which is still as far away from, flipping through the phone book, which was Herzog's only analogy, like, yeah, you want real, you want fact and truthiness, read the damn phone book. But, I mean, Penny Baker and Leacock, they were still pointing their camera in one direction. They were still editing it. They were still choosing who to film. So it just seems, it's a silliness. It's an important part of film history, silliness. But the freeing luxury of just embracing the artifice of it all, at least for me, has been a real kind of release of pressure, mentally as an audience member. And if that experience has been anything similar for you as an audience member with this or another film, has it also then given you a flexibility in your own filmmaking?
So what? I heard the rain out there.
I know. Sounded nice, right? Just that being less beholden to, an idea of what's real in a movie. I think discussions of reality or realism in a movie is about one of the least interesting conversations I've ever had.
Well, the spirit of something, as long as you get the spirit of it correct, I think that's the bottom line, because ultimately what I'm after is, and I was chasing on the Defiant Ones, is feeling. You want the feeling to be genuine, you want the emotion to be genuine, and if you capture the spirit of what happened, that's the best you should be able to do, because it's about emotions, it's about feelings. It's not about, if you're gonna go just on fact, you're gonna lose everyone. Because it just, in fact, life is so random anyway. I mean, if you really think about it, that's what's cool about this film. That's the way life is. It's not linear. It's random.
Little flashes
And you capture a feeling, and I think you brought this home. You know, it's interesting watching it here with an audience. The first 30 minutes, I knew this, but the first 30 minutes, again, I'm like, oh shit, are we losing everything? You learn a lot about what we can process too.
Yeah.
And I learned that doing the Defined ones, especially in the documentary medium, because it's a lot of talking heads. And then I learned you have to air out, you know, show beautiful pictures of mountains or, you know, ocean, and, you know, let people process what they're, and the first 30 minutes of this, there's not a lot of process time, so you're just like, oh shit, what the hell is going on, you know? But ultimately, he hooks into you,
Yeah, that's an important point, and we'll get to some audience questions in just a couple of seconds. But on that point right there you were making, how do you embrace, or how are you humbled by, perhaps, that level of godlike control over your audience as a filmmaker and as an editor? Well, that level of either allowing them that breath or not.
Well, I'm like, my mother is my greatest audience. My mother's only 67, but she has the attention span of a millennial.
Right.
And I would take, what I love about documentaries, you're making them in pieces. As you can feel that in this film too.
Sure.
So you
of course, take years.
Yeah, over years, no beard, right. You know. So you can take 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and I would show every type of demographic you can think of, you know. And there's a general, you can sense when people are like losing it. You know, they're not interested. It's palpable. And it doesn't matter if you're 16 or 60. It's gonna be the same point. Right. And I was clocking that on my documentary. Feature films are a little different. But on the documentary medium, I'm like, oh, okay, right here, I'm losing them. So I was very cognizant of when I needed to throw an uppercut to just throw people, you know, wake them up. And so I don't believe in, as an artist, like turning my back on the audience and playing for myself. Hitchcock said, you know, cinema's not for, you know, one seat, it's for 2,000 seats. So you should respect those 2,000. Right. And I'm always very mindful of when that comes. And no matter how great a movie is, there's always that moment, like 45 to an hour 10 in, where the whole audience goes,
start itching.
It just shifts.
Yeah.
It's always gonna come. It's what you're gonna do with when they shift. You know, when your particular shift happens in your film. I think James Cameron has been a magician at that, because these films are coming in 3 hours long, and the shift happens, but he knows when to throw the uppercut. You know?
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about it as a dreamlike state. It's kind of like the same idea of you know, REM cycles too, of a dream state. Whenever that shift comes, you'll either get lost or wake up or get bored and walk out of the theater, or whichever thing it is. Speaking about attention spans too, I'll just point out the fact that my mom stayed through the whole screening. She's back in there.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. So I am happy to open up the questions from the audience, if you have any for Allen up here.
Or if you want to go out in the rain.
Yeah, no, believe me, I've got plenty. I could talk over this one. Yeah, Michael.
This makes me think of Shakespeare, who was not teaching history, but teaching the lessons of history, and how Orson Welles was drawn to Shakespeare as well.
I mean, he was schooled heavily in Shakespeare. I mean, but the command over storytelling is just impeccable, you know. I would never, I mean, I've learned so much from him. I've not studied Shakespeare, I must confess. But yeah, I mean, I you know, my generation, we learn through, you know, and you take what you can take, you know.
Yeah, that layering of narrative and story, at least, is some kind of connected thread too.
And there's some people like this that are, you know, like so unique. If you're gonna source anything, you know, I mean, he's a vast knowledge of all kinds of narratives. This is the guy to source from, for my generation.
Sure, because he doesn't worry about whether he's actually right or not. I mean, when you would talk about adapting, you know, Mr. Arkadin or some of these others that are actually, you know, lesser known for being adapted from pulpy, you know, more genre sort of novels, he would just sort of flippantly say, like, yeah, I glanced at it a couple hours last night, let's go make a movie. And, you know, he's Orson Welles, so that people let him do it.
He's at the
And
best of,
it's this other thing.
the academia, and, you know, just the pure emotion artist, which usually you don't have both, you know, you lean one way or the other, and he has a both.
Yeah, he doesn't fetishize the fact over the meaning. Yeah. Right here?
Yes, this is a movie about forgery. They're talking about forgery of paintings, which is where I mean, I do think there's a difference. The painter is showing you his vision. The forger is showing you painter's vision. But I'm wondering what forgery is in movies. You don't hear about a forgery in a movie. You don't hear about somebody else making a movie in somebody else's name or doing something. What is forgery in movies?
François Coppola always quotes his father as, "You steal from the best," so there's all kinds of forgeries.
Right, but that's what you always do.
Yeah, if you look at, and I call out myself, but Paul Thomas Anderson will admit, if you watch Boogie Nights,
Yeah.
you can see whole sequences lifted out of Goodfellas, not just shots, sequences. And I've done it. My brother and I did it in minutes. Usually your first film, that's why I bring up Boogie Nights.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if it's like a direct as painting, like stealing the painting, but when people don't do it well, they lift sequences of shots. And I think that's not good.
Yeah, because you don't have any choice other than to be blatant about it, so you might as well just take a long breath and they won't catch up with it.
It happens a lot in film, though. You know, just not again, the auteur, the artist, you're not going to be able to knock that off, the point of view, like a painting.
You know, one of the great things right with the film festival was like seeing the eyes of Orson Welles
Yeah.
last night and then seeing the nuts. And just wondering, both of you, your comments, because one is looking at Orson Welles and the other is Orson Welles expounding and exposing himself. And it's a very interesting juxtaposition to have within almost a 24-hour period.
I don't know, have you seen that other movie, The Eyes of Orson Welles? We
Which
showed
one
it
is
last
that?
night. It's this very, kind of a personal essay of its own from a filmmaker going through his archives of sketches and drawings, and continue screening.
I have not seen it.
I mean,
Yeah,
one of the
but-
things that I couldn't help but think about, having seen that last night, was
Yeah.
his conclusion that, about the great Shakespeare films, and Laurence Olivier, he felt like Olivier built like Orson Welles and vice versa, and they have a real divide there. And his point that he had come to, because of looking at the sketches, was it's all about form and visualization. It isn't about the soliloquy and the grand words. It's about what's happening in front of you in terms of.
Also
It's about
chimes
the
in,
how again, it's about the how.
and
Cinema.
Chimes at Night's also just an awesome movie, you know, and it's similarly pastiche and pulling from a bunch of different plays and whatnot. We can do maybe just two more questions. Is anyone in the back I hope can grab yet right there?
I wanted you guys to drill down just for a minute, if you could. I'm pretty floored by one particular sequence in this movie, and it's the Sharp Cathedral sequence. And as a guy who's like I like spiritual cinema, slow cinema. I've never associated Wells with any of that. That passage kind of got me there a little bit, and I just wonder has that sequence been, I mean, you guys are familiar with how the movie's been mulled over and received and critically parsed. Is that a standout sequence in this film? What do people make of that? It stood out to me.
I'm gonna hand this off to you, because I gotta tell you, as many times as I've seen this film, I never clocked that.
Right?
This is the first time I was like, whoa. Again, I was high, I don't, a lot of times. You know, like, I just,
I mean, I can't really speak to how, like, at least you're talking about it in scholarly circles.
Just,
or
yeah, like,
it's been sort of
I never
excerpted.
heard it discussed, and I've seen this film years ago, and I have no memory of that passage. So
It's sort of, I mean, it's all about that notion of auteurism and authorship, right? Because he takes this big, grand, you know, and supposed to be too much for an individual human mind to take in. And then he really just kind of reduces it down to this little kind of glib line of, yeah, no one signed it either. And then goes into this big old Wells montage. So at the same time, I feel like it's actually kind of tongue-in-cheek in that it's very lyrical and dancing around and fairy dust. And then he's like, yeah, screw that thing over here. Like, and that, not to say that it actually undercuts those very lovely, hazy images, but he's using it as a preposition almost to this other thought that he already had. And I think that's kind of one of the more super Wellsy things.
It's a great thing about watching them on the big screen, because as many times I've seen it, that scene never washed over me the way it did tonight, today, I'm sorry. Sure.
All right, we can do one final question. You've had your hand up a few times. Sorry.
You guys wonder if this film had any influence on American Pimp?
No, I hadn't seen, when I made American Pimp, I hadn't seen him. I think the first time I saw F for Fake was in the early 2000s. I never knew it existed, you know. So no, American Pimp, you can look at American Pimp, it was the first documentary I did with my brother, the fine ones I did by myself. And you can see the approach to storytelling, and then look at the fine ones, you can see the direct influence. Again, I wasn't hacking, but you'll see that I didn't realize tonight how much. Again, I wasn't taking notes, but it was tonight for me. Today, I keep saying tonight. This afternoon for me was like a profound thing came over me where I'm like, wow, it's so interesting. You are what you eat. That comment. You truly are. People, artists, filmmakers, writers, whatever, producers. We get so caught up in the note-taking process. And I take notes, don't get me wrong, but I was devouring so much while making the Defiant ones, different than when I was making American Pimp. And it's interesting, like how much it just stays in there and comes out. And when you show your team, you go watch F for Fake, and what they take on, you know. And so you are what you eat, you know.
All right, well, Alan's going to be back in this theater later this evening for Menace to Society. We're going to be screening Defiant Ones later in the weekend. Go see They'll Love Me When I'm Dead tomorrow. And The Other Side of the Wind on Sunday. I promise if this did anything for you, Allen Hughes.